Good morning and welcome everybody to another episode of Bridging the Human Divide. My name is Shera Sever. I'm an organizational culture, leadership consultant, and changemaker coach. I'm the founder of Igniting the Spark and the Community Resiliency Project. I work with organizational and community leaders on creating transparent, aligned cultures focused on people development, social and planetary wellness. Bridging the Human Divide is my newest series where I host everyday change makers who are committed to moving from polarization to the understanding of divergent perspectives in our communities, our workplaces, our organizations, and our personal relationships. The intent here is to invite all to gather around the fire of collective heart intelligence so that we can all move forward with more grace, understanding, dialogue, and engaged compassion and action. Today, I am very honored to welcome my guest, Samantha Sweetwater, who is the creator of the Solucent Coaching and founder of the One Life Circle Plant Medicine Ministry. Her facilitation bridges neuroscience, somatics, ancient wisdom, integral psychology, permaculture, and 30 plus years experience as a transformational facilitator, community creator, and a serial entrepreneur. She's my kind of gal. Her training includes an MA in wisdom studies, emphasizing integral theory and Eco-Shamanic trauma mentoring, a dream coach certification, Reiki master, and Priestess Ordination. In her work as a healer, Samantha meets you as a whole being, gently guiding you towards wholeness and your soul's truth. Today, I've invited Samantha to share her perspectives on the co-generative nature of relationship, interconnection, interbeing, and how we can depolarize our world when we begin to see each other as family. And I just want to say as well that Samantha agreed to be on this episode today while going through possibly one of the biggest crises that Northern California and Southern Oregon communities that we're both deeply connected with is going through. And so I just want to thank you, Samantha, for being the warrior, or the warrioress, and saying yes to continuing with today's episode. So welcome, and my heart goes out to everybody in this very difficult time.
Thank you. It's really nice to see sunlight behind you, like to see the window far behind you with actual sunlight. We're in, I'm in Mill Valley, California, and the air outside is actually breathable. Whatever's happening, we haven't been able to find mapping of it yet, but we've got atmospheric level smoke that's inhibiting the sun. So it's about the equivalent of about 15, 20 minutes after sunset, half hour after sunset. There's no light. It's quite an experience.
Yeah, I've seen the photos. It's unbelievable. The only thing I could relate it with, and that would be a very light way of, is winter in Scandinavia. That's the
Right.
only thing I could think of.
I mean, it's the equivalent of a volcano eruption.
Or a volcano eruption.
Yeah. 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 I'm curious how far it goes because the plants can't photosynthesize in this.
So I think our theme today about bridging the human divide, seeing each other family, is very appropriate for what so many hundreds of thousands of people, our neighbors, are experiencing. And so I think I'd just like to start the conversation with, prior to the fires, we had a conversation about doing this series or having you part of the series. So just curious, Samantha, like what inspired you to join the conversation?
You know, I'm very much here as an advocate for the evolution of humanity. And I've spent my life doing various initiatives, projects, businesses that are really dedicated to the emergence of a culture of belonging and reciprocity. And when I say belonging, I mean human belonging to like the reality that we're one human family, and to our local places, and to our, excuse the noise in the background. I'm gonna, hold on one second. I'm gonna. Thank you. So I've spent my life very much dedicated to the emergence of a new kind of pattern for civilization that is grounded in all humans belonging to our planet as one, as family, regardless of race, color, creed, gender, or belief system. And that also restores our reciprocity with our biosphere and with our local ecologies. So, you know, that's been my drive. A regenerative culture of peace is my life mission.
Yeah.
Or what I call Civilization 2.0,
Yeah,
which is a next stage, you know. So I feel really aligned with being here. I feel, you know, it's interesting because, to be transparent, my nervous system is somewhat triggered. And, you know, there's deep lessons in this of like the very heart of resilience. And at the same time, there's incredible opportunity in crisis for new cultures to arise. Rebecca Solnit actually wrote a whole book on it around the kinds of cultures that arise in crisis situations. And it's so deeply timed to be so clear that we are neighbors.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
You and I have such an alignment with purpose, and you know that's one of the reasons why I wanted to be in this conversation with you. What is the title of Rebecca's book? Do you remember?
You know, I don't know. I'm
Okay,
not sure.
okay, that's okay.
Yeah.
Solman is her last
Solnit,
name.
Rebecca Solnit. And it might be Dancing in the Ashes, but I'm not actually sure. But she's very prolific, and it documents specifically what happened in New Orleans after the major tornado flooded the city. And that's a pretty well documented instance, but there's incredible documentation also after the 1989 earthquakes in San Francisco. There's many situations, but it's interesting, I think, we haven't been the same with refugees from other places, and we're entering into a phase where anyone can be a refugee at any time.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what I think what we're seeing right now in our own backyards, specifically in Northern California and Oregon. But I just looked at a global map today, and it had where all the fires are happening throughout the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just unprecedented. Still in the Amazon, also in the Congo and in Africa, which is considered the second pulmonary center of Gaia, of planet Earth, mm-hmm. and it goes on and on. So when we can start to look at things from that perspective, it really does bring us, at least some of us, closer together in a sense of family. So I know this is your life mission. You've been exploring this most of your life, or certainly as long as I've known you in the last 15 plus years. So I'm just really curious, what are the causes? I mean, have you uncovered what you see and believe to be the causes of divide and an increasing, probably some of the most intense polarization that we've experienced in this country in our lifetimes, but also globally?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh God, the causes. It's interesting to look at it in an integral map. So for people on the call, I tend to look at things through a very basic integral map of when you ask what the causes are. It's like, what's the interiority of the cause? What's
right.
the aspect of our own consciousness, our own stories, and our own interior experience of self? And then on the external, what are the structural causes? And those
go
two,
for it. Yeah, I love it.
those two things loop back and forth. And I mean, in some ways we can go back to the agricultural revolution, and then we can go forward. You can say that was the first layer. And then we can go forward to, the cycle of Judeo-Christianity and placing God outside of the world, which allows us then to see the world as profane and as something we have dominion over. And then we can carry that forward into patriarchy, and then we can carry that forward into the scientific and industrial revolutions. And look at we've reached a point where just in terms of technological and economic capacity, we have kind of an infinite, not infinite, I don't want to use that word, but we have a exponential capacity to mine, to take advantage of the resources of our planet that has been unchecked. But ideologically, we've also come to a place of the hegemony of the individual. Like since the Enlightenment, we've placed the individual as the front end of kind of like the apex of one's own experience and of culture, like the ideal being self-development. Right. But in all indigenous cultures, self wasn't structured that way. Self was structured in membership to the world.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And, so it's been my hypothesis, my theory, my narrative for a long time that as things get increasingly worse, it becomes increasingly obvious that we are interconnected. It becomes increasingly obvious that there is no way. It becomes increasingly obvious that the individual cannot reach a pinnacle alone, that we can only go there together.
Yeah, I love that.
And so it's interesting because I feel like the last, really since 2012 has been very strongly tracking that I don't think we will actually turn back. Like, I don't think we will turn, like we've made our human narrative upward facing. We put transcendence above immanence. We put, in the integral model, Ken Wilber has put cosmocentric consciousness above Earth consciousness. But for a long time, I've seen like the actual evolutionary pattern is when we bring it back down and understand that it's up to us to reweave, for the Ouroboros, for the snake to eat its tail, for us to reweave our relationship with the earth and our understanding that individuation isn't actually that meaningful if we're not also sharing it with each other and with the beauty around us.
That's fantastic. I love that you took us on that journey. For some people that may be the first time they've heard this conversation. For others, this is their narrative. But I also like to simplify and synthesize very complex views, and you shared quite a bit of wisdom right there, Samantha. So, what I'm hearing again is the cause in a very simple explanation. The cause is just the consciousness and the belief that we are separate, as you said, separate from each other or separate from the earth. And I'm so happy that you brought back in and reminded us of the indigenous cosmologies, and that's cross-cultural. We're here to be stewards and protectors of all life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you could say the cause is simultaneously the consciousness and the external structures that co-generate it. Like, I know you're a student of consciousness and of the nature of the creation of systems. I'm too. And what's really interesting, I think this time is also forcing us to get very accurate about this map of how consciousness pushes the forward edge and then matter builds it, and how it's happening. It's constantly happening. It's not like, oh, we're all going to awaken and then it'll be fine. It's like, as we awaken, we also build different systems that operate differently on our consciousness.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the imperative, to turn towards the situation rather than silo yourself into some new age positivity story that says just focus on the positive.
Yeah, well, I'm in an area right now where there's a lot of focusing on just the positive. and a lot of conversations around the new earth, and that's what we're here to do, is birth the new earth. I believe that.
Uh-huh.
I have, there's no question about that. But I'm not yet hearing about the systems, the simultaneous um, uh, disruption, dissolving, creation, birthing of the new systems. So would you like to go there? Did you want to talk a little bit about some of these new systems, either two areas, what you see and what you're currently working with and contributing to?
Yeah, I mean, and
Yeah,
I would add what I don't see.
yeah,
um,
go for it. Just, I love
but
this.
I mean, what I often don't see, I see people telling a new earth story, but I don't see them doing a lot. And I think what I do see that's really positive, that's coming out of people across ideologies and narratives, is really actually very responsive, like response to how do we educate children in the context that we're in, for example. Like there are new earth opportunities embedded in the COVID education problems that people are facing, that where kids and parents are saying constant online education is not what my children need. And you don't need to be an advocate for the new earth to say, all right, we're going to do community-based education with our kids and we're going to get them outside. And
Exactly.
we're going to teach them how to grow seeds, and we're going to bake, and we're going to weave, and we're going to do math that's in relationship to real things in your real life, and et cetera, et cetera. And I know more and more groups of people who, again, who cross political divides, who are
Exactly.
actually just responding to the needs of the children. That's a great example. I mean, another real example is that California is now really grappling on a policy level with what sustainable forest management looks like. And, you know, I've been on a number of calls saying, responding to people who are like, yes, but what do we do right now? Like, what's the quick fix? And just saying, actually, I need to ask you to advocate, to step into a midterm, long-term fix with me, because the quick fixes don't work. And I need you to I'm in these conversations where it's like, we need to understand what systemic regenerative management looks like for our soils, for our ecosystems, for our forests, for our watersheds. And that those are real policy conversations that are happening in the state of California with
Yeah.
real policymakers, where, you know, grappling with like, all right, so we actually could do that with $11 billion. Are we willing to dedicate that, and that becoming a real conversation? So those are examples. And
Yeah.
I think a really simple example right now that I'm part of is just how can those of us who are relatively safe and grounded open our homes to those who are dealing with evacuations
Yeah. I love
and
that.
losing
Thank
homes.
you so much for sharing that. You know, a lot of my passion for community resiliency, community regeneration, the kinds of education that you're speaking of with, let's use nature as education. Let's use the principles of permaculture, for example, as education for our children and communities. I've also been very inspired by that. And it all started when I joined the Pachamama Alliance back in 2005
Mhm.
and became one of the first facilitators with Awakening the Dreamer, Changing the Dream symposium, which is now global. I mean, that really grounded in my mission and purpose. And I learned so much in that community, which is now global, about the exact things that you're referencing now, Samantha. And I started a little group here and started in Oakland and last year after the fires, and now in Sedona, Arizona, the Community Resiliency Group. And COVID has taken, has put a bit of a dent in the momentum, but very much that some of what you're talking about our resources, our water source, soil regeneration is so critical. And, helping our children also become leaders is a big focus of that group. So thank you so much for sharing some of what you're involved in there. Is there anything else you want to share about these systems, like as we're co-creating new systems while the others either quietly or with big bangs dissolve?
I mean, I think I want to speak to the individual level, because you and I are both, you're an organizational person. I'm a coach, and
Okay, yeah, go
I
for it.
What's interesting is individuals alone, like as an individual, you can't address a whole system. You can hold an understanding of a whole system, but each one of us can only do what we can do. But so we're in this interesting point where we're in a crucible of consciousness, in a sense, where increasingly people understand very clearly, I'm nested in bigger systems that are bigger than myself. And there's a process that happens there that often begins with a profound sense of disempowerment.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Okay.
you realize you can't move the system as a whole. That's not the way complexity works. But what you can do, and this is so key, is you can choose what uniquely calls to you within the context of a systemic understanding. So that's different than saying, I'm just going to do me and I don't care.
Right.
But when you say, I'm connected and I'm a unique part of the fabric of this complexity, then you can figure out what's yours to do. And there's a balance, especially in a time of crisis, between like universal things you can do, like open your home or feed people or be part of an education program for kids,
Right.
or advocate, work on safety, like safeguarding this election, which is another thing that I'm working on right now. But there's also what only you can do. And there's a perfection to that actually is mirrored by systems knowledge. Like
Mm-hmm.
humans are part of a system. Each one of us is a unique operator in the system. Each of our souls carry a unique code in that. So the way I think of that is as there's a soul ecology that's kind of pulling unique gifts out of all of us. And it's a very important time to kind of anchor into, what am I uniquely here to be responsible for, responsive to, and creative in, and it's like that is where this upward moving pattern of human consciousness and human discourse starts to loop back into it stitches beauty back into the creation. And that's literally how we'll take civilization to the next stage.
I love it. You're speaking like with such eloquence
Thank you.
in explaining this. Thank you so much. Just that stitching beauty back into the social fabric. What is it that you said?
Back into the fabric of
Yeah,
the world,
yeah,
like it's
just our fabric of humanity and of life.
of life.
But I just want to take a moment and just kind of absorb everything you said, because they're so beautiful. And one of the points you said that it was kind of like it's not about I'm just gonna do me, and really emphasizing that the individuation is not the solution. And I think that perspective of you stay on your side of the street, I'll stay on mine, I'm just going to do me, is what really has contributed a lot to the divide that I'm seeing. And again, I'm in a completely different landscape than I have been in the past, which has really inspired me to host these conversations.
Mhm.
So thank you. Thank you for also sharing it from a perspective of what the individual can do. And I've had a lot of conversations with people that have also been asking the same thing, like, what can I do now during the great turning, as Joanna Macy says. This is the time. Or the sixth mass extinction, if you want to look at it through that lens. So what can I do? What's the contribution that I can make? So thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple more things. In our earlier conversation, you had mentioned to me, again, you really wanted to focus on we as family. and how to see each other as family. I mean, how can someone step into the consciousness, if you will, of seeing others as members of their family? I just love to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, I took notes on our conversation because we had such a lovely conversation.
Right. Yeah.
It was great. And there were three kind of takeaways. And the first is to recognize that regardless of whether I agree with someone's politics or their analysis of the situation, that we are actually a part of, they have families, I have families. We are all part of a process that's biological, that's trying to carry forward, you know, our best assessment of how to get our kids to the next generation, how to get their kids to the next generation, how to make good on our grandparents' intentions for us. You know, we all are doing that thing.
That's very true. Yeah.
Every single,
No borders on that one.
no borders on that one, you know, except if you're a sociopath, and then there's a real problem there.
Right.
And I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole right now.
We won't. Okay.
But if you're actually in a human operating system, a generally healthy operating system, regardless of what your analysis politically, in religion, and anything, like, it has the same objective. And so it's so important to look at other humans and kind of look through. I feel like you look through this. Sometimes as a psychic, I'm sure you can feel this too, share it, but you know, you can feel the field of the ideas and the ideologies, and but you have to look through that to the person who's also just trying to make sure their family moves forward.
Absolutely. You know, you said it, I think it was in our conversation that we had too. It's like, it was such a powerful reminder that I think everybody can nod their head on. And it's like, we're not our belief systems. A person is not their belief system.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, we're not.
Just remembering that.
You're right.
If we can see beyond that. And I think that's a big part of what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I'm looking at my notes because I kind of put two pieces together, and they're actually interestingly different. So the first one I would call respect.
Right. The pillar.
The first pillar is respect, and it's actually looking at the person as another person, regardless of their beliefs, and starting there. And, you know, it's interesting. I just came back from Minnesota, which is where my family is from, and was in an area where, kind of like where you are right now, where there's a lot of there's a spectrum of political beliefs, right, that are strongly held. And it was actually very helpful for me to be in a place where, like, my family is all Minnesotans, and there's a part of me that's a Minnesotan. And it actually was really helpful because there were other commonalities that my body could feel, that were grounded me in just that deeper sense of, I can respect people. I can really meet people as family. It's interesting how diversity and homogeneity play into this. It's actually sometimes harder to meet a person with respect where their cultural background is really different from yours, because there's deep pre-verbal cues there that have them feel less familiar to you.
Yeah, did you want to talk a little bit more about that? Because I've done a lot of cross-cultural and diversity work. I actually started my career many years ago working with people from over 30 different countries and facilitating cross-cultural communication conversations in companies. And that's really what got me on this track, that and I think the Pachamama Alliance. But if you want to just, the effect of that, the effect of the lens that sees different, did you want to speak on that a little bit more? As how
I'm fairly sure you have a much deeper field of knowledge there than I do, Shera.
No, you're on a good roll, so go for
it. It's interesting. I think one of the things I've looked at a lot, and that I'm a healer. I work with communities to create greater wholeness and healing, both for individuals and within community. And one of the great conundrums around healing on our planet right now is when is it appropriate to heal in diversity, and when is it actually important to heal in homogeneity? And this is true, you know, for example, in the psychedelic community, there's a huge recognition that African Americans need African American guides to support some of the trauma healing that they need, and that can only be supported with that level, a deep level of shared experience. I think I came back from Minnesota. Yeah, I was working with people whose family histories are very similar to mine. They all come from veterans. All come from the same kind of trauma structure of addiction and dissociation and rageaholism that comes out of people being veterans of wars and coming home and working to raise families.
Exactly.
And there was a layer of healing that I personally had never experienced. I was holding space, but I personally received healing I had never received because of the homogeneity, relatively, of the group that I was in, of Minnesotans who all had the same background.
Yeah, same trauma. So it was sort of a similar cellular or collective cellular structure that had emerged in several generations of time. That's what I'm hearing you describe.
Yeah, and literally, you know, after 35 years of being on this path, I had never been in a place, and in a context where I actually got met there.
Yeah, that sounds really, really profound and deeply healing.
It was amazing. So, you know, in that, I think what we're leaning into, and like literally being asked to lean into, it's a real precipice, is how do we create spaces of compassion, co-create mutual listening, safety, and belonging within increasingly diverse circles. And then embedded in that is an additional principle of making space for and green lighting spaces that are homogenous, and actually really holding that up. And that also is a principle of respect. It respects the uniqueness of each person's context.
That is so beautiful, Samantha. Yeah, I'm really inspired. I haven't heard you approach it or describe your work in this way, and I'm really, really getting it and really resonating with it. And I'm sure that our listeners are going to as well once they have a chance to hear our recording. I wanted to also move to the area of trust, mistrust, self-responsibility. These were some of the other topics that you spoke about that really have to do with our theme of depolarizing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other keys that we spoke about is the key of self-responsibility. And, you know, in this great mystery of being a human and being a being of consciousness, it's like the only, Angeles Ariane said it this way: it's always 100%, it's always 50-50.
Wow.
Very clear. She was an organizational person with the United Nations, and I don't know, she's brilliant. Is brilliant. And the part that is 100% is the part we have to do every day. You know, it's like waking up with the skies like this. How do I ground? How do I take responsibility? Can I track the part of me that wants to blame the other, blame the society, be angry at people on Facebook who are having great days in sunny places today? You know, can I anchor that in full self-responsibility and responsive? Like, self-responsibility is like you gather all your energy in and you say, I can ground here. I am at choice here. And you bring yourself back into choice, not into reaction.
That's beautiful. And from what I understand, a lot of the one-to-one work that you're doing is helping people do exactly that, what you just said.
Yeah,
That,
you know, and,
that self-regulation that then
right.
becomes a co-regulation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And only through that self-regulation as a constant cycling can we be good at co-regulating. And we're always co-regulating.
Let's hope so. Let's
You
hope
know,
so. And when we're
so
not co-regulating, that's when we're getting some pretty intense division and
well,
violence.
and we are, and that's why we have so much co-division and violence in a
Right.
sense, because we're super dysregulated.
Whoops. I lost your sound.
That was my cat.
Oh, okay. Well, welcome. Welcome to the community, right?
So it's interesting because I agree with you, but it's interesting how it's this, like, it loops, because part of why we're getting so polarized is because we are still co-regulating, and that's triggering. Like, you can't not co-regulate with what's around you. It's always happening. So part of why the polarization is increasing is because we're co-regulating with the polarization.
With the polarization, or with the media,
Or
with
with the
the
media.
disinformation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
self-regulation is how you unplug a cycling of co-regulation that sucks.
Right. That
And
drain you.
become
Right.
more individually regulated and more powerful and help in your part of shifting collective co-regulation.
I love it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you could say you can only be response able. Like, I use the word responsible as a couplet, like to be response able.
Absolutely.
And you can only really be response able if you're anchored in sovereignty, in a certain level of self-regulation.
Yeah.
You can only co-regulate with others well from that place. Otherwise we're always at effect.
Exactly. So let's talk about that. We're at effect, meaning we start to travel down the spiral rabbit hole of becoming a victim.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk just as we wrap this up.
Mm-hmm.
The self-regulation, because you also made a very beautiful distinction that I haven't heard quite voiced that way, about we're always co-regulating in response to what's in our environment. But are we being response able, as you said, or are we being reactive in a co-regulation? So let's go back to the self-regulation. And again, our theme is family and bridging the divide. With all the work that you've done, one-to-one, just super transformative work, powerfully transformative. Just what would you like to share? Because it's increasing. And then when you've got environmental crisis occurring as well in your backyard, some self-regulation practices that have been very beneficial both for you and for the clients you've worked with.
Oh, my
I
favorite
know.
one these days, and this is really simple, is there's two different practices that dovetail. The first is to remind myself and anyone I'm talking to that I am a location in God's mind.
Mm.
And the way I do this, it goes back even faster when you're on a screen. But if you look away from the screen and you look around the room and you observe yourself, you go into awake awareness, you observe yourself seeing. And you're seeing what is apparently outside of you being perceived inside of you in a constant circuit of inner outer. It's continuous, and it's a relationship. And the reminder is, I am a location in God's mind. And the mantra I like to say there is, help me to be a good neighborhood in God's mind.
Oh my goodness, that is beautiful. Yeah, it's an observing exercise, an observing practice without being attached.
Right. And it places you in a non-dual state. in a
Yeah,
way
I love
that's
it.
also active. So it's very different than meditation because
Uh-huh.
it helps you to be literally actively in the seat of
Yeah.
mindfulness.
So active consciousness. How can I be a good neighborhood is rather than good neighbor, it's like just a good energetic field, a good neighborhood.
Well, and literally that you are a seat, you are a location from the
Okay,
vantage point of the soul and of consciousness.
I love that.
And that
That's the first
location,
I've heard. I really, really love that.
mhm.
Okay, and more.
So related to this ability to feel and sense non-dually and return to the biochemistry, the neurochemistry of non-dual presence, of active, calm, well-regulated presence, is you start with the statement of self, I am being. Which is an instant invitation to find the still point inside your moment. And then the next statement, once you find that, I am being. Observe your being and the perception happening, even of my voice or of this screen. I am doing.
Mm-hmm.
And observe the sensory continuity that's occurring in your presencing of being. So there's an action to the being that is constant. It never ends. You're always perceiving the light. You're always perceiving the sound. You're always perceiving the breath. There is never not something you're perceiving. And that's an action. I am doing. And then you add the last piece of this, and this is an immanent model. So it's being, doing, becoming. And you state, you observe just the duration between I am being, between before you said I am being, to then when you said I am doing, and you're observing, and you observe that there's a motion to it.
Emotion or movement
No,
motion?
just emotion,
Emotion.
just a difference, a change that occurs. And the last affirmation is I am being. Excuse
Again.
me, I am becoming.
Okay.
The last affirmation is I am becoming.
This
And then
is beautiful. Yeah. Is
it's,
that a system that you've created just based on, is it a synthesis of just a lot of the work that you've done?
yeah, it's a synthesis over time. I mean, my background, I have a very deep background in yoga and
Right.
meditation and dance.
Right.
And
Freedom.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it is, I'm now, I mean, I'm a student and a practitioner and a guide with psychedelics, and a student and a practitioner and increasingly a guide of a body of work called the immanent metaphysics. That is, for me, it's the true non-dual philosophy
Okay.
that resolves the polarities of, say, for example, masculine and feminine, or void and fullness, with the reality that there's a relationship between them.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of non-dual philosophy is actually still very dualistic because it focuses on the duality pairs. But what actually makes consciousness possible is the relationship between subject and object, you know, which is mirrored in relational psychology, that the reality of self is a function of, and this goes back to co-regulation.
Right.
The reality of self and emotional health is a circuitry of mind, brain, and relationship.
Absolutely.
That self is known in that trinity. And so the research kind of culminated in finding the immanent metaphysics, and I spent the last couple of years as a student of it, and finding ways to facilitate it, which I work with the philosopher who's written it. And then that dovetails with like a life study of relational psychology as fundamental to healing and well-being.
I love this.
So, and somatics.
This is fabulous. So immanent metaphysics. And so that the practice that we could, again, I think I mentioned to you earlier, I'm really into applied psychology. So it's like practices that people can have tucked away in their magic backpack as we're in this, again, in the great turning, right? Creating the new earth in very grounded, realistic, inclusive ways. So we've got those four. So I am being, I'm
doing,
I am doing, I am
becoming.
I am becoming. This is beautiful. What a beautiful way to start the day. And or any activity that you're going into, as simple as taking out the trash or entering yet another peaceful protest in your city. That's just, it's a really beautiful practice. Thank you so much, Samantha Sweetwater. And to get more information about Samantha's work, how you can work with her, and what she's doing also with communities and organizations, you simply go to her website. Is that right? SamanthaSweetwater.com.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much also for being an example of what it is to be a leader and to show up as you just did today in a time when you've got a dark sky at noon, and many members of your community are in complete panic right now, losing their homes and being displaced. So I really want to thank you for sharing this message with us today, Samantha. And is there anything else you'd like to say before we close?
No, it's been a real pleasure, Shera. Thank you.
It's been a great conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. Have a beautiful day.
Yeah, you too.
Take care. Be safe.